What's happening, everyone? Welcome to Shift Podcast. This is the final episode of season 1. And today I interview Ben Cooper of the Professionists podcast. Ben used to be a lawyer and he worked in Australia, he worked in London, and now he lives in Texas, of all places. And he works with young professionals and young adults who are in career planning, trying to help them figure out what a career path may look like. He helps them decide how to shift careers if that's what they need to do. We had a great conversation. We talked a lot about what's going on culturally. We talked a lot about what's happening in different career paths, different sections of industries. And I think you'll really enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed getting to know Ben, getting to talk about what's happening, getting to talk about what he does and his experience. And I think, if you're a young adult and you're looking to try to figure out how to figure out what you want to do, you'll get some insight from it. And overall, I just think it's a really great conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. And this is it for season 1 of Shift the Podcast. We are going to take July off. We're moving the family. We've got things to do. I'm going to put some focus on them. And then in August, I will start recording season 2, and that will drop sometime in September. So in the meantime, share the podcast, catch up on the episodes you've missed, and let us know what you think over at feedback at togetherweshift.com. And enjoy your summer, guys. We'll talk soon. We've been talking about the culture and the season and where we're at and how uncertain things are. And I'm really fascinated by what you do in coaching young students and helping them find a professional path, especially when I got a kid who wants to be a TikTok star. And I'm like, I don't even know, but that's a job. There's people that make a living doing that. And who knows how long that'll last.
I know it's the kind of thing where you used to say, I'm sure as a parent, you're like, oh, look, 2% of people, like being a professional athlete, you can say, hey, there's this 1%, 2% of people who make it. And, you have to have a backup plan. But then you have people who are pulling down tens of thousands of dollars a month for taking pictures of their dog on Instagram or TikTok. And so it is one of the most entrepreneurial times to be alive, because there's so many ways to build a business in ways that just didn't exist 10 years ago. It's a really interesting time. And I work with students who are interested in going into different professions, and they sometimes wonder if it's worth the effort because they've seen someone who's found a niche on YouTube or TikTok, and they've figured out a way to make money doing that without having to go to graduate school, for example. So it's an interesting time, I think, especially for that millennials and this new generation coming through, Zennials, I've heard them described as well.
Yeah. How hard is that to help them navigate whether or not that's sustainable, right? Because yes, you can make money at YouTube or TikTok or these things, but I feel like the concern I have as a parent, certainly, and someone who hosts a podcast and uses social media and thinks that, I certainly don't consider myself an influencer in that respect, but someone who's fascinated by how that works. I always wonder, how sustainable is it? And I always see these Instagram reels or TikToks that are the behind the scenes, and it's your 15-second TikTok that took me 3 hours to produce. It's a real job. It is real work.
It is work. It really is work. And a lot of the big social influencers, it's not just them. They've got a team of people who are, running that business behind the scenes. I think the hardest thing is this youngest generation right now, they have a reputation for jumping between jobs very quickly and not necessarily staying somewhere, and having an expectation that they're going to be in positions of leadership very, very early on in their careers. And I think those that do pursue this path, they do have the freedom to be their own boss, but you can't jump in and out of it. You've got to be really consistent in order to make it successful. I think what's interesting is that the old logic was always go to high school, graduate high school, go to college, get your degree, and that would be the ticket to the middle class. And, certainly from the data I've seen, college graduates do earn more than people who don't have a college degree. The difference is they also have a lot more debt than people who don't go to college.
Right.
And so I think a lot of high school students and college age folks are wrestling with, is this the best way for me to get ahead and achieve my dreams? Is this a good spend of my time and money? And in some cases, yes, it absolutely is. And in a lot of professions, you have to have a college degree in order to go on and get your necessary graduate degree, law,
Right.
medicine. But there's also a lot of degrees out there that don't naturally lead to anything. And I think that's going to be very interesting in the next few years, especially when you look at the way that we have democratized education. You can go on YouTube
Yeah.
and you can find a guy making a video on how to build a dog kennel, but there's also someone explaining Bitcoin and
Yep.
stock market. And I mean, there's an incredible amount of free quality information out there. And that doesn't even include the stuff that you can pay for that's out there that is still going to be really helpful, useful information. So I think that's going to be interesting in the next 10 to 15 years, is
Yeah.
because you see companies like Google not requiring college degrees anymore. And so I just think that presents an extra crease for young people to be thinking
Yeah.
through.
Do you think it's fascinating to me because I have like I was saying, I have a large family and we homeschool, so our kids are currently outside of the education system or the school system where
Mhm.
they're heavily educated thanks to Khan Academy, YouTube,
Yep.
different online programs, much of which we get for free, some we can pay for. And what's fascinating to me is that they get to learn what they want to learn when they want to learn it, and I find that they retain it better, and that always leads to like another level of interest and a deeper understanding of the topics, as opposed to like you need to learn this today and then tomorrow we're going to learn something completely different.
You
And
get to tailor it too in a really unique way.
yeah.
If your kid is interested in architecture, then you can find a bunch of books so they can get those English skills, get those composition skills while focusing on the thing that they're
Yeah,
interested in. I got a buddy who homeschools. He's got 6 kids. His 12-year-old is reading Augustine's Confessions
I love
and
it.
engaging in meaningful conversations about it.
Yeah.
At 12, I went to a state school system. I would not have had a clue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating because our kids are all in such different spaces. And like I have one son who I don't fancy myself a car guy. I don't really, I want it to work, but I don't necessarily know how it works. Um, I'm grateful for mechanics and friends who know those things. And when he turned 16, he bought a car and wanted to swap the engine and tune it and make it go faster. And I was like, good luck. I'm not the dad that can teach you that. And he bought a second car, did an engine swap, did it all on his own, paid someone else to
Wow.
do the electrical because it was beyond what he wanted to. He could have figured it out. He was just like, it's like spaghetti. I don't want to mess with it. But I watched him learn this. And now at the age that he's at, his critical thinking and his problem solving and his logic just through going through that exercise like was amplified because now dots connect easier for him than other people. And I could have tried to force feed that to him, but it would have never worked. And so I'm fascinated by what's going to happen, like you said, in the next 10 or 15 years, because I think outside of like medicine, law, and maybe finance, but with the emergence of like crypto and some of the things that are happening, I'm
Yep.
not sure finance is going to require degrees. And so I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on how to coach and guide young adults into career paths that are really ever changing.
I think the biggest asset they have is their youth. And what I mean by that is they have time. I work with a lot of students and young professionals who are under great deals of self-imposed stress.
Mm.
And that's some of that stress is coming from this pressure to have everything figured out before their 25th birthday. And it's self-imposed, or in some cases it's parentally imposed.
Yeah, I
But the
wonder how much
reality is,
that's parental having a hard time shifting from the old the old thought processes to this wild, wild west.
Well, I think that's part of it. I also think in a social media generation, there's a perception that all of their peers have got it figured out.
Yeah.
And that if they haven't got it figured out, they're behind. And so I think those two factors are big pieces of it. But their youth allows them time to make some teachable mistakes, to try some things. Maybe they try a business and it doesn't work out. You're 24. You
Yeah.
learn from it, figure out what didn't work out. And if you really want to run your own business, then go back to the drawing board, get a job to pay the bills while you figure out the next business.
Yeah.
And, you can try a few of these things before you're 30. And if nothing pans out, you've got a bunch of great experience that you can leverage into some other career. But if you feel like you don't have that time and you need to make a decision, sometimes you make the wrong decision and you end up in a career that you spend a lot of money pursuing,
Yeah.
but ultimately realize I am miserable and unhappy.
Miserable.
And so I just think I'm a big fan of people having gap years, whether that's a gap year between high school and college or between college and perhaps grad school.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's interesting to me because I'm a huge fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, who I'm sure you're aware of. And
yeah, I think he's got a following for a reason. He's really straight to the point, doesn't sugarcoat things. And I
yeah.
think a lot of people want that.
Yeah. And I think he struck a chord with people, letting them know, like, you're young. It's okay. Go explore, go play, go figure it out. And I'm not, as a homeschooler, I'm not anti-school. Like, I would still be in college if it was up to me. Like, I'm a learner. I love academics. I want to know everything. It's part of the reason why I do a podcast and talk to interesting people, is I want to know all these different things. And I think, like, my son, who's 21 now, when he was 18, as a homeschool graduate, and all of his high school friends, high school age friends, were going off to college or going off and experiencing things. A lot of it was, they were all anxious. Some of them were on meds. Some of them were clinically depressed. Some of them were, potentially suicidal. And he and I had really hard conversations about where that was coming from. And a lot of it self-imposed. And some of it was, parental influence of, we don't pay for your car if you don't go to school, and we don't do this if you don't get this kind of grade. And it's such a weird thing, because I look at it through the lens of, like, especially in school, when you look at a textbook that's published in 2008 and it's 2020, you're like,
Yeah.
it's old information. It doesn't apply to today. And then I think the social media pressure is another piece that, like you kind of mentioned, like, everyone has this perception that everybody's got all figured out, because we only see the best of their experience. Nobody sees the behind the scenes with the 6 cameramen and the 17 takes and the all the stuff that's required to put out this facade. And yeah, I can't imagine being a 20 something today. I'm really grateful I was born when I was born, and I don't have to experience that for myself.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good. We're just going to flow.
I think one of the other things too, and I'm guessing we're probably a similar vintage, is there has been, I don't want to blame it all on helicopter parents, but culturally we have taken away a lot of responsibility from young people. I mean, you think about our grandfathers, they were working at 14, 15 years of age with adults.
Yeah.
They grew up quick.
Mm-hmm.
And we have periodically taken away that responsibility from young people. And I think as human beings, work is we are designed to work. Now, that doesn't mean we're designed to work ourselves to death, but there's human dignity in doing work. And what I hope we see, and I think people like Jordan Peterson have become popular because generationally a lot of people are hungry for this, is giving people some ownership of their outcomes, and not just saying, hey, I'm a victim to my situation. I'm instead going to say, hey, this thing happened to me and it sucked.
Yep.
But I can choose to just live here, or I can say, I'm actually going to take some responsibility. I'm going to get myself to where I want to be, which doesn't mean it's plain sailing, you know. And that's not to say
Yeah.
that people don't suffer some really crappy situations with setbacks, but I think that attitude of, okay, this happened, but I'm not going to allow it to define me, is attractive to a lot of people who have never been given opportunities to come back from something.
Mhm.
You know, I have a lot of, you know, freshmen in college who are used to mum and dad picking up the phone to their high school teacher saying, little Johnny and little Jane didn't get this essay in. Can you just accept it? And that's not helpful to them because
Right.
they've never had a chance to make a mistake where the consequences are actually pretty
Yeah.
unimportant. Oh, you got a D on an English test. Okay, fine. But if you haven't, that's not going to define you. It's not going to prevent you from going to college or having a great life or whatever. But if you have never allowed someone to make a minor mistake where the lesson can be learned, but the consequences aren't that great, the older they get, the more serious the consequences are.
Yeah.
And if you've never had a chance to learn from some of those mistakes, it's just a rude awakening to adulthood, I think.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson, and I know he gets a lot of flack for some of the things he says. And I think a lot of that's just the way that it's marketed. Because if you really just take the words and listen to them, they're correct. It's
There's an article on the Atlantic, and I'm not going to get the title exactly correct, but it was something along the lines of, why can't people listen to what Jordan Peterson has to say? And
yeah.
I think part of his narrative has been hijacked politically, but if you
Yeah.
actually just read the words,
Hmm.
there's an awful lot of truth. But I think he is one of many. So I'm a massive fan of Jocko Willink.
Hmm.
And Extreme Ownership was a book that really was a great kick in the pants for me, but in the best possible way. David Goggins is another
Yeah.
guy, and so I work with a lot of young students, and it's not just the guys. There are a lot of young guys, but there's also young women who are reading this and saying, you know what, I am gonna I am gonna create some discipline in my life, and
Yeah.
I am gonna hold myself accountable to a standard, and I've got a plan, and I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm going to execute. And that's fun to watch.
Yeah.
It's the most rewarding part of my job, is seeing people realize, hey, I have a vote here,
Hmm.
seeing them put a plan together. Maybe they make some mistakes, and seeing them kind of pick themselves back up, move forward. I mean, that's really fun to watch. And I think that's what a lot of people are hungry for.
Yeah. I think I know you kind of said you didn't want to blame it on helicopter parents. I'll probably say I will, to some degree, because one of the things that we as parents that I don't want to say struggle with, but I certainly am mindful of, is how much freedom we give our kids to explore, to play, to fall. You know, there's a lot of instances in my life where I've been somewhere and other parents or even my wife on occasion has said, hey, you know, that's dangerous. What's going to, I said, well, it's only going to happen once, because they'll
Yeah.
learn. Like, they're only, this is how we learn. And I think that there's so much value in having the experiences. You know, I've got a couple of adult children, and things that I've told them would happen. You know, hey, you come from a family that has addiction issues. You want to be careful with X or Y.
Mm-hmm.
And those things have happened, and they've come back as adults and said, yeah, you were right. But I knew that they would have to experience those things on their own. I can plant the
Yeah.
seed, but they're going to have to experience them on their own. And if I keep shielding them and protecting them and preventing them from feeling the pain, then I think what happens is when they get into a place where they do experience pain, they have shell shock, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
I don't know how to respond. And their whole world kind of falls apart around them, and they don't recognize how to pick themselves up and figure it out. And so for us, like, one of the big things that we focus on is much less the academic stuff and much more the abstract, like how to critically think, how to learn, how to figure our way through problems, because they're going to show up, they're going to happen, you're going to have problems, you're going to have challenges. And knowing how to learn and how to think is for me so much more important than knowing who are the Axis powers and who are the other guys and those sorts of things, right? Like it's so yeah, it's pretty interesting. And I'm curious for your experience, like um what is that, how does that show up in coaching young professionals who have maybe come to that crossroad where they hate their job or they hate their choices, and do you find that it's hard for them to admit, or do they have to like really hit bottom, or like what is that like helping someone recognize like, okay, I'm on my own, I've made some bad choices, it's time to make a shift?
It's a good question. I think people get an inkling that it might not be the best fit, but they look at it and it's kind of the sunk cost fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
I've invested all this time, I've invested all this money. Then you have, I have a lot of parents who have a lot of their own self-image tied up in what their child has achieved.
Mm.
And so they get the parental pressure, even though they're no longer living at home, they're out of college, there's still this kind of delayed onset adulthood. And so the parents still exercise a lot of influence over the children well into their 20s, sometimes even later.
Yeah.
And so even if they have this inkling that it may not be the right path for them, they sometimes stay a little longer than they should. The flip side of that is sometimes you have to embrace the suck for a little bit and you realize, actually, once I've learned how this business works, and once I've realized that my boss is being hard on me, not because they don't like me, but because they want me to be better, they can actually come out the other end and end up staying in that industry. One of the best bosses I ever had was the hardest on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until later on where I was like, this guy taught me some incredible lessons that I use to this day, even though at the time it was not necessarily a picnic every day, but I
Yeah.
will forever be grateful to him for the way he taught me. Uh, I think because of some of those parental pressure issues, I think a lot of people really have to bottom out before they decide to make a shift.
Really?
Not everybody, but as a generalized, I think a lot of young professionals will stick at it, especially where graduate school has been involved, just because it's involved extra
Yeah.
cost and money.
Yeah.
I think that the the difficulty when it comes to making a shift as a young professional is also the reason to do that as a young professional. So if you decide to change careers in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, can it be done? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it can be done. Is it a picnic? No. You have to be willing to take a step down. It's very, very rare that you can make a career change laterally.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you need to take some steps back before you can catch back up. You have to be prepared to change the way you live because you have to build a war chest. You
Mm.
have to build up a financial reserve so that when you do take that pay cut, you can still keep the lights on and keep your kids in school and all of that fun
Yeah.
stuff. So it's harder when you're older because you have more responsibilities and you have a little bit more at stake. It is a little easier when you're 27, 28 and you've been out, you've tried something, you've given it a real go and it hasn't panned out. You still have a lot of youth and a lot of time to make that shift. So I think it's a good idea to make that change sooner rather than later, but at the same time to caution people against um, just quitting and moving when things get difficult.
Yeah. That's interesting. The sunk cost fallacy is one that I would have probably leaned into the most, because I went to school. I have a degree in interior design, and I have the student loan that comes with it, and I have all the things that go around that. And that was sort of my second career from hospitality. Originally I wanted to go to school for architecture. Through various reasons I wasn't able to, so I landed in hospitality because it's an easy trade when you live in Las Vegas, and it's good money.
Yeah.
It was great money. But I went back to school. I got my degree in design, and I only did that for about 5 or 6 years. And then 2008 hit, and the markets crashed, and the
Yeah.
housing boom, the housing bust, and all the different things that happened. And I ended up back in hospitality. So I was grateful to have a trade that I was able to fall back into. Um, but for me, where it really, really hurt was exactly what you said. Like, I have a student loan. I've invested this time. I went to school.
Mm-hmm.
I did all these things, and now here I am, 10 years post college with what I do has absolutely nothing to do with my degree. and and I still have a student loan to pay back. The is emotionally, is kind of brutal, if I
Yeah.
allow it to be. I have to look at that and go, okay, that was a season and that was a thing, and you do the things, and it's a crazy thing. So I get where 20 somethings are like, I don't want to take on the debt, I don't want to fight the fight, and having that parental pressure, not recognizing how the world has changed, has got to be just really difficult. um and I don't know that I have a question in there. I'm kind of just fascinated by the dynamics of all of that.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably a good place to just jump on into how do you even figure out what it is you want to do?
Yeah.
And, like my parents didn't have a college education. I was the eldest child. Now, I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed public speaking. So, at surface level, law was a good fit. Um, but here's where it circles back. I didn't I didn't talk to anybody. I never talked to a single lawyer before I went to law school.
Mm.
I had a very particular. I mean, I grew up on John Grisham. A Few Good Men was one of my favorite movies. This very kind of idealized picture of,
We're
of what the law is
definitely in
like.
the same vintage.
Yeah. uh,
100%.
and I think I mean I know I would have still gone to law school. I actually enjoyed law school, and there were parts of being a lawyer that I really did enjoy, and it opened up. I mean, I just would not have had the opportunities that I've had, and I don't think I would be here had I not. In fact, I know I wouldn't have been here had I not
Yeah.
gone and had a legal career. Now, what I would have done, however, is talk to a bunch of lawyers over and over and over. So the idea is you talk to people who are doing the thing that you think you might be interested in.
Yeah.
And I still would have gone, but I would have done things really differently. I would have focused on some different things. I would have been more deliberate about certain things. And so I think part of the reason a lot of young people find themselves unhappy in professions is because they haven't taken ownership of deciding what it is they want to do. And part of that is we force people to make decisions when they're 18
Yeah.
with very little experience, and we don't really teach students at
Yeah.
the high school level about financial education or
Yeah.
financial management. So they're signing up for stuff and not really knowing why. But I think what I would encourage anyone to do who is of that college age, or even high school for that matter, is to figure out some of the jobs that you think might be appealing to you, and then start reaching out to people who are doing those kinds of
Yeah.
things. And you're going to talk to some people who like what they do. You're going to talk to some people who are treading water. They don't hate it, but they have a
Yeah.
mortgage and 3 kids. And so they just keep at it. And you will talk to some people who are miserable. And you
Yeah.
need to talk to every one of those groups, because the idea is you talk to a good number of them, and you're going to begin to see trends. The happy people made some fairly similar decisions. The miserable folks, you will find, generally makes certain decisions, and you might think that a career is this incredible, awesome career path, and then you start talking to people and you're like, oh, this is actually kind of different to what I thought it was. And I think I would just encourage people to take ownership over their own career selection and not be told what to do by anybody, but to explore it and on their own. And I think people would be surprised at how willing people are to share their experiences if you just make the first step. But again, we're talking about social media. I think it's been made so much worse by COVID. Is that I think there's a general anxiety about reaching out to somebody that you don't know, especially an adult when you're a young person.
Yeah.
But I would just encourage anybody listening to take that first step, because the worst that can happen is someone says no, in which case you're exactly where you are right now.
Yeah. I think that's tremendous advice. Um, I did not speak to anyone in the design and architecture community when I went back to school.
Mm-hmm.
And there were aspects of that career that I loved. And much to like kind of what you shared, there were other pieces that had I known that that part was 80% of the job, I probably would have figured out a different way to do, the things, because I wanted to create, I wanted to paint, I wanted to play, I wanted to do, and that's great. And we get to do that as designers 10% of the time.
Yeah.
The other 90% is chasing clients, doing paperwork, all that stuff. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about, like, because two things that jump out at me. One is, like, you mentioned how we have kids at 18 making decisions, and it's like, man, there's not much I would trust an 18-year-old with at this point, because you talk about, like, we kind of talked about, like, grandpa was working at 14 and had life experience and had done things and had been around. And most 18-year-olds, they're just not in that same mindset in this current culture. So, like, I'm curious what your thoughts are around, like, how do we shift the cultural conversation into, maybe you don't need to start college till you're 22. Maybe you need to go work, a landscaping job, or be a lifeguard, or do something else to just experience life, and shift that sort of mindset around, you graduate in May from high school and you're in college in September. Like, that's not best practices from my experience.
Yeah. So there's a few things to unpack there. 18-year-olds can make great decisions and they can make responsible decisions. We have 18-year-olds in the military who are rolling around in multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. But they're also given responsibility.
Sure.
And I think we have to, and there's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Coddling of the American Mind, which is a fascinating read. And I think one of the things as parents is to be able to allow your I'm reluctant to use the word children, but your students to have some responsibility early on in life, where there is some room for them to make mistakes that they can learn from. And as they learn from their mistakes, they will start to assume more responsibility, and you can trust them with that responsibility. So I am not for a second suggesting that 18-year-olds should not go to college, but I do think that they need to be more informed about their decisions. And, if they're not going to have opportunities to do that in high school and at home, I'm a huge advocate of work experience. Now, part of that's cultural, right? So in Australia, we don't have majors in the way that you do in the United States. If you go to university in Australia to get a bachelor's in engineering, that's equivalent to a master's here, because from day one for 4 years, the only thing you study is engineering. There's no language, there's no Aristotle. It's engineering for
You're
4
not doing
years.
2 years of general study and reading,
No.
math, writing. It's
And if you
just
get, and if you get 2
okay.
years in and you decide, hey, this is not for me, and you want to go do something else, the clock starts again. You go back to zero. And so if you didn't know what you wanted to do, then it was very acceptable to be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get a job. And I think that would be helpful, even if it's just a year. I think it helps mature you in a way. My very first job, I was like maybe 15 or 16, and it was working in a kitchen as what I lovingly call a dish pig. And it was I was a kitchen hand, and I really enjoyed cooking. And I thought for a time, you know what, I could maybe go an apprentice and become a chef. And that seemed a really romantic, idyllic lifestyle because I enjoyed cooking. I enjoyed the science of it and the process of it. But that job as a kitchen hand helped me realize that, like, okay, their hours are not 9 to 5. It's high pressure, it's high turnover. And so that experience helped me realize early on, okay, I actually don't want to be in a kitchen on a full-time basis. I want to have a different skill set, and that meant going to college. I just think we are in such a rush right now to get from A to B, and would encourage anyone who's listening to just step back for a second and say, measure twice, cut once. I have a buddy of mine who's, did 20 years in Army Special Forces, and his expression is don't rush to failure.
Yeah.
So I think get good information, take responsibility for your own research and decision making. Doesn't mean you don't ask for help. Doesn't mean you don't have people that you go to for guidance, but you have to take responsibility for the career paths and the decisions that don't pan out the way that you had hoped.
Yeah.
But that's part of getting to where you ultimately want to be, is not being afraid to make a mistake.
Yeah. I think the idea of slowing it down is has a tremendous amount of value. I heard a phrase from the pop singer Jewel once in an interview, and it's the weird.
That's really stamped us right now, time wise.
Yeah.
To know who Jewel is.
Completely. But she said hardwood grows slowly, and that really stuck with me because it. I don't know if you're familiar with Gallup Strengths as an assessment. Huge fan. We have a strengths coach for our business, and my top two strengths are activator and achiever. So I like to leap before I look and just get let's get right to it. And I've had to really kind of work on practicing slowing down and thinking through a few things because I have found that sometimes just taking a breath has helped me. And so, and I don't mean to sound like, 18-year-olds aren't capable, because I'm constantly amazed at what my younger children and what my adult children have done. And at the same time, it's like, because we aren't teaching financial stability, because the world is shifting, especially like through an American perspective with like Social Security and the end of life, what worked for my parents and my parents' parents isn't really an option for me anymore. And so for my kids, it's going to be even less of an option. And so like, how do you, because we're not teaching that in high school or and some form of young adult, because maybe that's the role of the parents to do that. And so I'm certainly trying to do my part to do that. It seems like it would be beneficial, since kids are in school 60% of the time, that the schools take on some of that responsibility too. Because when I was 18, man, I was invincible. I didn't want to think about when I was 65. And my 14-year-old certainly doesn't want to talk about when he's 30, let alone, How do you have any insight or any thoughts on what you've seen that's maybe been beneficial to helping 20 somethings recognize that, like, yeah, being a TikTok star is great and you can make a ton of money in a short period of time, but man, is that sustainable or not? And what do you do to be smart with that and not, get your Bitcoin Lambo?
Well, I mean, the thing is yes, there are some people who make a lot of money on TikTok, but there's millions of TikTok accounts, and there's millions of Instagram accounts, and there's millions of them that make no money.
Yeah.
It's still a really small percentage. It's still a small percentage of people who make the kind of money that people look at and go, that's what I want to do. I think part of it's cultural. You and I remember what it was like to have dial-up internet. Where, if you jumped on Napster and you wanted to download a song, it could take you 2 hours to download a 3-minute song. If you wanted to find out what was the history of the Korean War conflict, you had to go to the library and get a book. And sometimes the book was quicker than trying to look it up on dial-up internet. And so that just cultivated a little bit of patience, which is not to say it was perfect, but you had to go through a process to get information. Now we don't bother trying to memorize or learn information, because we have these phones that we carry around. And we just Google it and we get an answer. Now that answer may not be nuanced, and it may not encourage us to go and read different sources and consider different perspectives. But the point is, we can get something instantly. If I'm hungry, I can get on my phone and get on DoorDash, and I'll have food from pretty much anywhere I want in my area within 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
That's just not something you and I had growing up.
It's funny to me, we still call it a phone when the thing I use it the least amount for is
Exactly.
calling someone. It's still a phone, but the last thing I do is call people. Like,
so, I mean, I don't want to be, I don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, back when I was a boy. But I think from a perspective of how do we help people learn patience? How do we allow people the space to make informed decisions that are their own? Got to let them make mistakes.
Yep.
If you rush something when you're 14, maybe that's you're running around the pool when you shouldn't be to get somewhere, and you slip over and you break your wrist. Yeah, it sucks, but you learn a lesson.
Yeah.
You try a job as a 17-year-old, and you're like, I'm going to try this. Is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go sell mobile phones. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not as productive or as profitable as I thought it was going to be. Maybe I do need to go and spend some time focusing on my grades. But when you take away opportunities to fail, you take away opportunities to learn. And we talk about how, well, young people aren't this and that. Well, it's like we haven't given a lot of the time, we haven't given them the opportunity to learn that through experience. And so I think the biggest thing is encourage people to take informed risk, not reckless risk, but informed risk, and allow them to make mistakes where the consequences are teachable, but not life altering.
Yeah. So I'm going to make a hard right turn.
Let's do it.
Because you talk about allowing them to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with you more that I think that's a really valuable thing. And I just shared some thoughts on mistakes. Like my children don't get disciplined or punished for making a mistake.
Yeah.
The first time.
Yes.
Like if I'm playing basketball too close to the garage and it goes through the window, then okay. Oh, I didn't think that through. Mistake. No big deal. Let's talk about it. Let's learn from it, like you said. And then let's not do that again. Second, third time that happens, now you're being disruptive. Now you're being rebellious. Now we have an issue that we need to address, right? And I'm curious from your perspective on, like, are you finding that people are less willing to make mistakes or to take risks because of the cultural shift that we've kind of seen into cancel culture? We talked about like Jordan Peterson a little bit. We talked about some of the other thought leaders or people who are sharing, what seem to be controversial, but don't really, in my opinion, need to be. Are you finding that people are like, I'm just going to put my head down, I'm going to do my thing because, man, yesterday's mistake is tomorrow's like unemployment line?
Yeah, I think the cancel culture is, it's been brewing for a little while, but I think it's probably a secondary symptom. I think the social media is probably the biggest reason, because think about all the things that we did when we were kids, all the mistakes that we made.
I'm so grateful they weren't on Instagram.
Someone was not recording everything you did. Like if you happened to fall down a set of stairs, there was no one waiting for you at the bottom of the stairs with a camera that they can then upload to their social media for millions of people to see.
Yeah.
And so I think, and when you see the consequences of that, and there's, there's plenty of stories of people having something done to them or a mistake, and it might not be anything controversial, but just some silly mistake that becomes a viral video or a viral meme or whatever. And it has not always great consequences for them.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of has played into this culture of play it safe, don't embarrass yourself, and there are obviously social media is a complex thing. There's people who've built entire, social media businesses out of being that way. But I just think there's definitely a role or a liability to be placed at the feet of social media. But I also think, I just think culturally things with the way we raise children has changed. Like,
yeah,
my parents would say, hey, we're out of milk. jump on your bike and ride down to the store, or we'd go and play out in the street, and then we had dinners at 6 o'clock, be back by 6. And that just doesn't exist anymore. We don't know our neighbors. We are hyper alert to risk. I think the other thing, kids in the 80s, parents worked a lot, and Gen X, they had grown up with parents who worked and worked and worked. And so, there's been lots of scholarly investigations into Gen X, for example, where when they became parents, they were the total opposite to what their parents were. So they were super hands-on, super involved. And so I think there's got to be some happy medium where you are kind of sitting up, keeping an eye out for, the boulder that's about to fall into the gorge underneath, but at the same time, giving them opportunities to not be told what to do, but to learn what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm a Gen X parent, and we're certainly in the camp of we're more hands off than hands on. And in many ways, we're the anomaly of our friend groups.
Yeah.
Where we're like, oh no, they're outside with no shoes on and running through the street and, playing, and we're mindful, and, we definitely lean into the risk end of things a little bit, I think. Yeah, it's interesting to me how that all sort of plays in, because I also think that like this generation is one of the most creative, and they're huge risk takers. And I think part of it is because they feel like, at least in my talking to like my adult children, they feel like they don't know what's the future holds. So they're going to live it out now, where we were definitely like the 20-year job, the 30-year career, the Social Security, the retirement. They're like, none of that shit's going to be there for me. So I'm going to get mine today.
Yeah.
Which is definitely way more of a risk taking a mindset, I think, than what my generation had. I mean, we were rebelling against, damn the man and all that. And we were like still going to college and getting jobs and doing that stuff. It was a lot of talk, where I see this generation is like really, they may not have the resilience that previous generations had, but man, they're willing to put it all out there for like Dogecoin, which is a a meme.
But again, it comes back to when you're young, you can take a bunch of these risks, and if it all goes pear-shaped, you have a lot of time to make up for that. It's a lot different if you're a 50-year-old and you bet the farm on Bitcoin and it blew up in your face. So I mean, again, I think living for now has a place. That doesn't mean it's a great way to go about living your life, because if you live for just the now, you're also going to miss out on a lot because you don't learn delayed gratification.
I'm so grateful you brought that up. I just read an article, and I can't even remember where, but it talked about one of the missing pieces is the current, and I don't even want to put it on a generation. I don't want to say, Gen X is better than one or the other, but like in this current cultural moment that we're in, everyone is sort of shifting away from delayed gratification. Like you said, you go to DoorDash, food shows up. I go on Netflix. Like I talked to somebody the other day. It was like, yeah, I'm going to watch this new Marvel series, but I'm going to wait a couple weeks until there's 7 episodes so I can watch them all at once.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, there was so much good in like having a cliffhanger at the end of a season or an episode and having to wait for the next show. Like, and if you missed it, man, you missed it.
Yeah.
But the delayed gratification is a piece that I think a lot of people maybe have not even heard, because it's kind of gone away with that instant gratification that we have with these mini computers in our hands.
Yeah. And I don't want this to be, oh my gosh, this generation's lost, it's a disaster.
No, not at all.
They care about things in a way that I don't think generations before have. They have a desire to do good things. I think where you marry risk or a willingness to take calculated risk um, with delayed gratification is classically seen, I think, in careers. So, okay, you've got this job, you've been there 12 months and you haven't been promoted. That might be because you have 12 months of experience and you're not worthy of being promoted.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's because, okay, boomer, your boss doesn't like you. But if you can
Right.
delay that and say, okay, I thought I would be a little further than I was, maybe I sit down with my boss and respectfully say, can you please help me understand what I need in order to progress in this career? And they might say, I'm really glad that you said that. We see you as having a lot of potential and a lot of talent. We want to give you a little bit of a roadmap. And that's going to mean, instead of just jumping ship and going to the next job, maybe delaying that expectation while you take care of some of these things that your boss or supervisor might identify you. And then by doing those things, yes, it might not happen today, but you might actually be in a much better place 18 months down
Yeah.
the road as
Yeah.
a consequence of that.
I think that's really, really smart. And it kind of goes back to the, living in the present has its, its benefits,
Yeah.
and having some roadmaps, having some goals. Part of what I do in my other life is a little bit of coaching. And before we jumped into this interview, I was coaching a colleague of mine in some of her goals. She called me very excited about her new goal list. And as
Yeah.
we unpacked them, I was like, well, those aren't measurable. Like, let's drill down. And I think having the ability to kind of set short-term, long-term goals and have
Mm-hmm.
those and being able to pivot. And I think one of the upsides to where young people are at today is their ability to pivot is much greater than previous generations, because they recognize that they'll probably have 2 or 3 careers over the course of their lifetime now, where 30 years ago that meant you were a failure. Like, what do you mean you're
Yeah.
shifting gears? What do you mean you're and so I think, yeah, it's not to bash one or the other. It's where we are, and we get to choose, like, is it amazing, is it not, is it, how do we find the balance, how do we look at, because I love that I have a phone that does everything.
Yeah.
Like, they told me when I was in high school, I had to learn all this math because I wouldn't have a calculator in my pocket. Well, guess
Yeah.
what? I have one on my wrist. It's not
Yeah.
even in my pocket. Like, that's amazing. There's so much great that comes out of it. And there's this really great book that I reference often, when I talk about cultural things. It's called Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. And it presents this really cool understanding of how our brains evolve and why we still like large breasted women, instinctively, when the real reason for that is that we subconsciously think they can feed our kids better, when logically that it has zero bearing on our ability to do that. But the reason is that, like, the way that our brains evolve is based on a small amount of stimuli over a long period of time. And where we live today, there's an enormous amount of stimuli over an extremely short period of time, and
Yeah.
our brains aren't able to process the bits and pieces. And so we're like Neanderthal brain dealing with, you know current day technology and stimuli and all the options, which a lot of times when you have so many options, it's overwhelming. And so, like, I'm curious how you got to a place where you felt called to actually help people narrow those options down to what they really want, maybe what their real purpose is versus just a career.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it was based on my own experience, and then also kind of just thinking over an extended period of time. How do you decide what you want to do?
Yeah.
So I think I had personally got to a point where I was very, very unhappy where I was. I was at a large firm. I had a job in a time where, we talked about the financial crisis.
Mhm.
A lot of people didn't have jobs during that period. So I had a lot of things to be thankful for, but I was commuting an awful lot. I mean, my trip to work took me 90 minutes each way.
Mm.
So that was 3 hours of travel every day. Uh, and I just did not enjoy what I was doing. And so I had decided I could go somewhere else, but some things would be different, some things would be the same. And so I started to think through, well, if I'm not going to do this, what else? What am I going to do? And that eventually led me to come to Texas, and was working with college students before I started doing this current role that I'm in now. And I think what I realized from my own experience was you have to figure out what it is you actually value. And by values, I don't mean be nice to others. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
do you value being a part of a team, or are you more of a lone wolf and you like to be left to work independently? Do you like the kind of role where it's constant and predictable, or do you like it to be varied and different every single day? Do you like the freedom of just working from one contract to the next, or do you need the stability of a full-time, long-term job? And once you figure those things out, then you can actually start to figure it out. What is it that I'm going to do? Because you do those interviews that I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and you start to hear about these other careers and professions, and you begin to be able to assess whether or not they line up with those values. And if they do, then this is something we need to explore in some more depth. If they don't line up with those values, then you can cross it off and move on to the next thing. So I think you've got, and it sounds so cliched, and to some extent it is, but it's also, it's also got some truth, which is, what's the why?
Yeah.
Why do you want to be a doctor? Is it for the prestige? Is it for the money? Because if you want prestige and money, there might be an easier way to get those two things. By the way, those two things in and of themselves not going to make you happy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of doctors and lawyers out there who have prestige and they have money. They don't love what they do.
Yeah.
And sorry.
No. I was just saying, Tony Robbins talks about the science of success and the art of fulfillment. Like, there's a formula to be successful,
Yeah.
which is the money, the prestige, the things, right? But there's an art to what fills your cup, what brings you joy, because it may not be the job, it might be something that the job brings, or like there's another layer to it that I think is super important.
Well, I think too, those things that you talked about, the money and the prestige, I think they're the fruit rather than the plan. And I think one of the things I encourage people as they're exploring careers is, I am not an I'm not of the thought or of the mind that if you do the thing you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Go
Mm-hmm.
and talk to a professional athlete who
Mm-hmm.
has spent their entire life training for a sport they love. But when they are a professional, they will all talk about, I'm a professional, I'm going to work.
Yep.
It's called work for a reason. Now, I love what I do. I love it, but it's work, because there are days where I would rather be chilling on a beach with my buddies than be at work. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. That doesn't mean I don't like it. But
Yeah.
I think when we buy into that idea, it's like, well, if I'm not happy this week, maybe it's time that I look for another job. Maybe this isn't for me. And it might just be that you're in a season where you are doing a new kind of work, or you have a client, and then you have to step back and say, hey, what can I learn from this situation? Maybe I can learn how to deal with a difficult client. Maybe I can learn how to deal with a difficult supervisor. And I say this knowing full well that in my own 20s experience, didn't always do that very well. But I think that's something just to remember, is we sometimes paint careers like they're this ideal thing that we have to strive for. And until we find this perfect career where it's, rainbows and unicorns every day, if we don't have that experience, we're not in the right career. And I just would say, hey, try and find what your values are. Try and find a job that meets most of those values most of the time.
Yeah.
And just realize that sometimes work is going to be work, and it's not always going to be exciting. Sometimes it's not going to be that enjoyable. But if you found something that meets most of your criteria, you're already ahead of the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a ton of value in that. And I remember having a conversation with my oldest son a few months back where he was kind of at a crossroads. What do I do here? What do I do here? I'm not liking the way this is happening at my
Mhm.
job. And I kind of said, look, I don't really know what to tell you other than in my, 25, 30 years experience working, everything you just explained to me has happened to me at every job I've ever had.
Yeah.
There's just some days that suck. There's just
Yeah.
some things that you got to look at. And I love the way you phrased it. And like, does it meet most of my values most of the time? Because I think that's really the key is, yeah, some days are going to fire on all cylinders and some days are going to grind, you
Yeah.
know, and for us, we've been lucky to land into a job or a career that people ask me like it seems like you guys are never working, and I'm like, well, it's because we've turned our job into our lifestyle,
Yeah.
and I like it that way. It's good. It's a balance for me, that and when I use the word balance very loosely, because I kind of tend to think balance is a myth, right? Like there's seasons of, I'm wrapping up this season of my podcast, and the next 2 months is us moving our family to a new home. And
Mhm.
because we have a large family, I'm taking extra time to ground them in that and create new systems and new things. And so I'll do less work, but I'll be way busier. Like
Yeah.
it's just, how do you choose to look at it, right? And how do you choose to feel about it? And I think, for a lot of people, it's looking for this idyllic sort of existence. And it's like, regardless of what's happening throughout the day, you can choose it to be idyllic if you recognize what are your core values. I think it's a really great place to direct people's attention. And also, like, I'm curious because do you talk about how you can be doing a thing that looks like, I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
It's kind of like architecture teacher, and what I do now, I feel like someone asked me like, what did you want to be when you're a kid? And I was like, well, I wanted to create stuff and teach, and like that's exactly what I do. I have a
Yeah.
podcast. My wife and I have a health and wellness company, and we educate people on how to take care of their health. And yeah, we sell product, but at the core, what I do is teach. It just looks way different than standing in front of a classroom with a bunch of
Yeah.
kids, or so I'm curious, like, how you can kind of, do you help people navigate, like, you could do that core thing, but it might be for a recycling company instead of a financial company, or
And I think too, it's okay to have a passion that's just that. It's like you don't have to convert a hobby into a business. Um, and I do think that just generally speaking, we tend to look at success very, very narrowly. So you might want to be in finance, and your perspective is investment banks, um, equity funds, venture capital, and that's it. But there are a lot of roles that are finance roles in a variety of different industries that we never even think of. You know,
yeah,
I will help students and young professionals who are exploring national security career paths, and everyone thinks of, probably three alphabet agencies, but
correct.
you know, there's 17 of them. And even when you take the military branches out of the equation, there's a lot of them out there that no one has thought of or considered. And so I do think figure out the things, the values, and then the rest of it will take care of itself, because you might find the example that you used was, what was it? Waste.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
recycling.
Waste management, recycling. You may never have thought about that, but once you actually talk to people doing the kinds of things, the financial things, you might realize, actually, this is a great company. I'm actually doing interesting financial work. And you'll care a lot less as, oh, it's waste management. Well, hang on, it might be a multi-million-dollar multinational company
Yeah,
with this awesome career path that just happens to have a core business in waste management. And that's sadly one of the things that I think that kind of perspective just comes with life experience and learning to care a lot less what other people think.
yeah, I think that's a really great place to kind of talk about and maybe wrap up, is how much of your time is spent helping people care less about what other people think. Because I know when I was a kid, when I was coming out of high school, it wasn't just what do I want, it is what are people going to think of me, what creates, like, I feel like especially, again, not to like harp on social media and things like that, but it's such a prevalent part of the experience at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is spent around helping young adults get clear on who they are and being comfortable living in that space, because I think that's a really vulnerable place for people to have to get, and it's not always easy.
No, I was going to say sometimes it's a pretty unpleasant experience because you have to kind of wrestle with your decisions, and some of those decisions were good. Not all of them. Not all of them. Maybe you made some poor choices. Maybe you ended a relationship with an employer poorly, and you have to take responsibility for that. So it's not a pleasant experience. I just lost my train of thought.
Happens to me all the time.
This is what editing is for.
Sometimes we just leave it in to go,
Yeah,
what?
I just lost my train of thought.
Also have no idea what we're doing sometimes.
Can you remind me what was the question? It'll come back to me.
Just curious about, like, how much time do you spend working with young adults, helping them figure out who they are and being comfortable with it?
Yes. So I think it's a huge piece of it, to be really honest with you, but it takes a lot of relational credibility. So I have people that I work with where they just want, hey, this is what I want to do. Tell me how to get there. And then we can come up with a plan for that. I have other people who will say, I'm thinking about these things. Help me filter this through so that I can figure out which of these options is the best fit.
Sure.
I have other options, other clients and young professionals who are really just trying to unpack, like, what on earth should I be doing? I have no idea. And that's where and this is the fun part, is getting to build a relationship with them where they essentially give you permission to kind of give some more of that direct guidance. So I'd say it's a substantial part of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it takes time. It's not kind of the thing that you resolve.
Yeah.
In three meetings.
Yeah. I think that's the hard part for so many people, is like getting clarity on what they want, and then building the confidence to own that, whether that's within their friend circle, within their social media, within their parents, whatever that is, to be able to say, I know that you wanted me to be a doctor. I want to be something completely different. And building the trust to, like, say, hey, I'm going to go play in this space for a little bit. And if it doesn't work out, maybe I do go back and do the other thing.
And I also think there's a huge role for just being uncomfortable. Like I used the example before, is I thought I'd go off and leave school and apprentice as a chef, until I realized, like, oh, these hours are kind of rough. And my boss is always, there's always a lot of yelling and screaming in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, this is not for me. And I guess the point is, you have to sometimes get to a place where you're just not willing to keep up appearances anymore before you have the mindset to say, I actually don't care. I'm doing this for me. And you might want me to go off and have this career, or you might think that me pursuing this sport or this interest or listening to this band is uncool. I don't care. And that sometimes just comes with maturity. I remember talking to some young professionals who were about to turn 30, and they were just freaking out about it. And I just remember sharing my experience of when you get to a certain age, you start to see other people's opinions for what they are. And you realize, unless you're somebody in my circle who I trust and respect, and your opinion directly affects me, you just have to learn to let go a little bit, because, everyone wants to be liked by people, right? But the reality is you can't be liked by everybody. And sometimes they're going to like you for totally unknown reasons. You might just have worn a shirt that they found annoying.
Right.
Or you just might have rubbed them the wrong way. You just can't get hung up on that. And that's freeing. I think you also have to be willing to step back and say, hey, did I do something that I could correct in the future? But just generally speaking, I think there's a freedom that comes with caring a lot less about what other people think. But I also don't have Facebook. My podcast has an Instagram account, but you got to kind of be willing to pull back to get that perspective sometimes.
Yeah. Let's talk about the podcast. So you have a podcast that I keep butchering because it's the Professionists.
Yes, the Professionists podcast.
And I keep looking up the professional list because my brain is not. So I definitely want to talk about the podcast and what's the intention there? What kind of guests do you have?
The podcast really came out of a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So having this very narrow list of careers that represented success and exploring all of the careers that are outside of that really short list that people have in mind. A desire to want to equip not just college students and young professionals, but mid-career and even late career professionals with some of those skills that can be helpful at any stage of the career. So I want to shift. So how do I build a network in this new industry? Or I don't have a mentor. How do I go about finding one? And then we also talk to people who are really experienced in their careers, and we talk about their journeys and explore lessons they've learned, mistakes they've made, what their own journey to that particular career was like. And so that's the general gist and the intent of the podcast. It's been fun to talk to a real spectrum of people. So, for example, we talk with Andrew Bustamante, who's a retired CIA field operative, and we talk about, how to get what you want in the workplace. And in season 2, he's going to come back and we're going to crack open the book on the CIA's guide to mental toughness. We talked to a diplomat with nearly 30 years of experience, a nurse practitioner, a management consultant, a technical recruiter. And so the idea is that we explore all these different professions. We explore soft skill development, and we explore the journeys of experienced professionals. Season 1 is up and out right now, so you can find it on all those platforms. And then season 2 will come out at the end of the summer. And in that season, we're going to be talking to private investigators, wine industry professionals, other healthcare professionals. So lots of really interesting conversations coming up. We're on LinkedIn at the Professionists podcast, and also on YouTube at the same name. And then we're also on Instagram at the Professionists.
Fantastic. I dig it, man. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and
Absolutely
unpacking. This was a super fun conversation. I love just jumping in and seeing where it goes. And it's always fascinating. And it's always great content and info. We'll put all links to all that stuff in the show notes.
And thank you for sharing it to your listeners as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And let's do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think I've enjoyed it, and would be more than happy to come back on if you think people would be interested.
Yeah, I love it, man. I really appreciate it. And